We have a quick question here from Sakim asking how he can get the most from investment bank reports. So thanks for the question, Sakim. There isn't really any secret sauce when it comes to investment bank reports. I am a firm believer that the more info you have to work with, the better your overall decision making will be. But there's also the risk of getting an info overload. Some traders call this analysis paralysis, where you've read so many reports and you've done so many additional research that eventually you end up not being able to pull the trigger because you have all of this information in your head and you don't know what to do with it all. So keep that in mind. That is something that can sometimes happen. But personally, I would rather err on the side of caution and make sure that I'm getting as much info as I possibly can. But having said that, you also want to be making the most of your time. So, for example, I'm not going to spend 2 hours every day, reading articles, for example, on Bloomberg, on how politics is changing the landscape in Madagascar, for example. It shouldn't have any that type of article shouldn't have any bearing on my immediate or medium term or even longer term trading decisions. So always make sure that you're reading something that will or could affect your decision making of a particular asset or asset class. Even investment banks can sometimes share thoughts on particular things that might be important for some of their readers and interesting, but it might not really have a bearing on the trading right now. So for example, if I'm reading a report on a particular investment bank's website, and the article goes it deals with the bank's in-house green energy initiatives and why that is important for them. It might be interesting for some to read, but that type of article is not going to help me in my trading today or tomorrow. So make sure you spend your time reading things that really makes a difference. Now, I generally read various site info. Just to name a few, Bloomberg. Unfortunately, you do need a paid subscription for this one per month. I also read reports from investment banks like Danske Bank, Scotia Bank, Wells Fargo, Nordea, Saxo Bank, Westpac, ING. Who else is there? BNZ is another one. IHS, which is the creators of the IHS Market PMI. So, of course, tomorrow we have the PMIs coming up. So you can always go to the ISH website then. In terms of the most recent releases, doing a quick analysis of what they're looking for the numbers, just as an example. If you visit these websites and the investment bank website, you'll find their research sections quite easily. And you can go through the vast amounts of reports they have available either on a daily or a weekly basis. Now, let's just take a quick example of this one that I read this morning, which is a daily briefing report from Danske Bank, and something that can always help you while you're reading these reports and making sure that you get the most out of them. You can always ask yourself 4 simple questions. So the first one is, what currencies or currency pairs is the report talking about, or what asset classes? If you want to learn something, read something specific about S&P 500, for example, is the article talking about what you want to find out? The second question you can ask is, what is the report currently saying is the reason for the moves in that particular asset? So, don't read something that tells you the euro US dollar has moved 100 pips today and stops there. You would want a reason for why the analyst is saying that particular asset or asset class is moving. The third question is, what events or catalysts are they currently waiting for to make their next move, or what particular catalyst or events do they think can create the next catalyst or move for a particular asset class, and how do they think it can affect it? And number 4, what is their short or medium term? What is their outlook for that particular asset class from here, and why? So do they have a bearish bias? Do they have a bullish bias? What's their short or medium term targets? For example, if they're talking about, the euro US dollar, and they say, if they just talk about the euro US dollar, it might be helpful, but it's going to be a lot more helpful if they say that they still have a bullish bias on the euro US dollar, for example, and they continue to target, 117 in the next 2 months. That gives you the currency they're talking about, or the currency pair they're talking about, their expectation for it, where they think it can go, the time frame, and then of course, why they think it can go there. So, if of course there will be articles that won't necessarily cover all of those 4 points. So it doesn't mean that you can, just ignore it. But if it doesn't have any of those 4, I'd say just ignore it. Make sure that you're getting value from your time. Other times when the reports can also be really helpful might be when they don't discuss, assets in particular, or asset classes or currencies or currency pairs, but rather events in more detail. So, for example, coming back to that IHS report for the market PMIs tomorrow, they also have a week ahead economic preview. So you can go through that event or go through that report and see exactly what what they're looking for the particular numbers or the particular events coming up, some additional information. That's also very handy. And also, what's also sometimes handy from these reports is when you've had a big market moving event, and the event didn't really make a lot of sense immediately. So a good example of this was the move we saw in the pound last week, that sell off directly after the BOE's decision. When you see those type of events and it's not making sense, any type of move you see in the market, it's always great to go back afterwards and see how various investment banks have analyzed that particular event. So what are they saying? What are they attributing to the reasons for those particular moves? That can also be really helpful in the short term. Just getting a little bit of sense of why. Or how various analysts have interpreted a particular event. And sometimes what you'll find is that there's a broad agreement amongst many of them. So you'll maybe read a report from Scotiabank and Danske Bank and Wells Fargo, ING, all saying the same thing. When it gets really interesting, for example, the one that we had with the pound last week, is that you had multiple investment banks all saying different things. So that's always interesting. It might not give you a clear answer on exactly why something happened, but it will give you a lot of extra thoughts on where and how some investment banks analysts are, or how they're looking at those particular events. So that is the way that I normally use these reports. It can be a great help. As I said, there is the risk that sometimes you get so much information that you can't really feel that you can pull the trigger. But I mean, it's always best to earn the side of caution and make sure that you have enough information to make the best decision. So, Sakim, I hope that helps. Any other questions, please don't hesitate to let us know.